Most people assume that loud endings leave the deepest scars, the shouting matches, emotional breakdowns, the slammed doors echoing down the hall. That's what movies show us, right? A drama equals meaning. But reality has a quieter truth. Sometimes the most profound impact isn't created by chaos, but by calm. Not by an explosion, but by a man who walks away with quiet dignity. No grand exit, no manipulative games, just a clear, composed decision to leave not out of rage or heartbreak, but out of self-respect. That kind of goodbye doesn't make a scene, it leaves an echo, a lingering presence. And that echo? That's what starts shifting her emotions in unexpected ways. While you chose peace, she's left sitting in the silence, forced to wrestle with everything that was never said. Everything she thought she could control by pulling away. Because here's the truth. Most women are emotionally prepared for the man who begs, who pleads, who loses himself trying to hold on to something already slipping. She expects the tears, the texts, the desperate call at midnight. That's the script she knows. But what happens when you don't follow the script? What happens when you don't flinch, don't chase, don't argue your worth? When you step back with your head held high and your heart steady, not because you're cold, but because you found clarity? That throws her off completely. Your calm becomes unsettling. Because a man who walks away without noise can't be manipulated. He can't be dismissed as too emotional or reactive. A stoic man doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to fight for closure. He walks away not to be followed, but to be free. Here's what she didn't expect. You didn't leave to hurt her or to get her attention. You left because you finally chose yourself. You realized your energy is sacred, and pouring it into someone who doesn't value it is the fastest way to lose yourself. Imagine the silence that follows. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It lingers. It becomes a presence she can't escape. That silence carries weight because it was chosen, not forced. You didn't walk away in anger. You walked away in alignment with your values, your peace, your dignity. In that stillness, a new story begins. Not for her, but for you. At first, she might not react at all. She may appear completely unbothered, almost indifferent, as if your peaceful departure meant nothing. But that's only because she was expecting something else. She had anticipated a performance, a dramatic ending, an explosion of feelings that she could respond to, control, or dismiss. What she never saw coming was your quiet composure. She assumed you'd give one last explanation, plead for clarity, or leave a door cracked open for possible return, but you did none of that. You didn't flinch, didn't chase, didn't deliver an emotional monologue. Instead, you stepped back with a sense of calm that speaks far louder than any outburst ever could. And that, more than anything, unsettles her. Your silence isn't empty, it's deliberate. It confuses her because most people expect noise when something ends. But when you left without blame or bitterness, it disrupted the story she was prepared to tell herself. A man who reacts emotionally is predictable. But a man who chooses composure, he's unforgettable. That's what Stoicism teaches. Not to suppress emotions, but to govern them with purpose. She thought your stillness meant you didn't care. She believed your lack of protest implied detachment. But over time, that silence begins to grow in her mind. It becomes heavier than any confrontation ever could have been. It echoes in her thoughts, pressing her to revisit everything she once dismissed. You didn't leave with the intention to haunt her. You left because your peace mattered more than performing pain. That's the difference between a man who's begging to be loved and a man who's learned to love himself enough not to force it. Now she replays conversations, rereads messages, and wonders how you walked away with such clarity and grace. Slowly it hits her, her peace wasn't passive. It was powerful. Your distance wasn't manipulation, it was a boundary. And by the time she truly realizes what she's lost, the man she once knew is already gone, not out of pride, but out of strength. You didn't try to make her feel your absence. You simply removed your presence. And that is what she feels most now. And what's most striking is this: your absence wasn't loud, but it created a ripple. It made her confront what she never thought she'd miss. The man who didn't argue, didn't demand, didn't beg, but who simply stood tall and left without theatrics. She starts to notice the emotional safety that came with your presence. The way you steadied storms without raising your voice. Silence you left behind doesn't echo emptiness. It radiates intention. And that intention is what forces her to reflect, to rethink, to realize that losing someone emotionally grounded feels far more unsettling than any dramatic goodbye. The truth is, your peace challenged her chaos. Or restraint forced her to. Hear the things you never said. Now, without even trying, you've become a voice in her mind, a presence in her reflection. That's the paradox of Stoicism. By not reacting, you left the strongest impression. Now, in the quiet that follows your departure, something unexpected begins to happen. She starts to notice the silence, not as absence, but as presence. The absence of your voice, your calm energy, your grounded spirit, it creates reflection. And slowly, she realizes that you weren't passive, you were powerful in your restraint. At first, she may have convinced herself that your silence meant detachment, maybe even indifference. That you were already emotionally checked out already, moved on. But time does something that no final text ever could, reveals the truth. The weight of your silence begins to press gently, but persistently, on her thoughts. Because what's louder than words? A consistent man who suddenly withdraws, not to punish, but to protect. She replays the little things. The way you responded with patience instead of pressure. The way you were present without being performative. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't beg to be seen. You didn't try to make her feel your absence here. Simply removed your presence. And in doing so, you became unforgettable. That's what Stoicism looks like in action. You felt everything, every loss, every ache, every disappointment, but you didn't bleed on her to prove your pain. You didn't mourn loudly or guilt her into staying. You carried your grief with dignity privately because your healing wasn't a spectacle. It was a sacred process. She thought you would return. She expected one more message, one more attempt, one more crack left open. But when none of that came, it wasn't confusion that set in, it was realization. You weren't cold, you were. Composed, you didn't walk away for attention. You walked away because continuing to give where love was unreciprocated was a betrayal of yourself. And that's when she begins to feel it, the shift. Not just in how she sees you, but in how she sees herself. Because you didn't storm out, you didn't lash out, you left with grace. You honored your worth, and that changes everything. The echoes of your self-respect are louder now than any final argument could have been. She realizes the man she thought would always be there isn't waiting anymore. He's growing, healing, evolving without her. And that realization doesn't just sting, it lingers. Because when you walk away peacefully, with presence and discipline, you don't just leave, you transform the space you once occupied. This is the moment she understands that your peace was never weakness. It was wisdom, the kind that only reveals its value after it's gone. She told herself you'd never really leave, that your presence so steady, so dependable was permanent. She believed she could pull away, test boundaries, take you for granted, and you would still be there, patiently waiting. It gave her a sense of control, of quiet power. But now the man she believed would never walk away is gone. And not because he stopped caring, but because he stopped proving. At first, she tried to dismiss it. She told herself it was temporary, that you were just taking a step back to cool down. But deep down, something else started to whisper. This time, it's different. This time, you didn't argue. You didn't try to change your mind. You didn't even ask for an explanation. You simply stopped showing up where your effort wasn't matched. Stand. That silence speaks volumes. It's not the kind of doubt that screams. It's the kind that settles in during the quiet hours. Late at night, when the phone stays silent, when she scrolls through old messages and wonders why none are new. When the weight of your absence begins to land, not just emotionally, but energetically. Because you used to be everywhere. In her routines, her comfort, her confidence, and now you're not. You didn't ghost her. You didn't punish her. You just stopped fighting for space in someone's life who didn't value it. That's not emotional distance, it's emotional maturity. That's not coldness, it's clarity. Stoicism teaches just that, to control what you can and let go of what you cannot. You controlled your response. You mastered your emotions. You honored your center. And now, the same stillness she once misunderstood as indifference has become the echo of your integrity. She sees it not as a disappearance, but as a boundary. You didn't disappear to make her feel abandoned. You stepped away because staying would have meant abandoning yourself. That's the weight she now carries. The missed calls she never returned. The messages she brushed off. The quiet reassurances she overlooked. All of them small at the time, now loom large in hindsight. Because in the end, it wasn't the grand gestures that defined you, it was the consistent ones. The presence that didn't need to be loud to be powerful. The love that didn't need to beg to be real. She realizes now that your silence was never passive. It was intentional. It was the language of a man who had grown tired of explaining his worth. You didn't leave her with chaos, you left her with clarity. And in that clarity, she sees herself more honestly than she ever has. Not because you made her feel small, but because your absence allowed her to finally see how big your presence truly was. She thought she was in control, thought she could keep your loyalty tucked away like a secret she could call upon when needed. She believed you'd always be there, consistent, steady, available. Your reliability became background noise in her world, something so predictable it stopped feeling valuable. But control, when taken for granted, often leads to silence. And your silence has become deafening. She used to be the center of attention. Every message you sent, every small check-in, every thoughtful gesture, it revolved around her. She was the gravitational pull, and you circled with quiet devotion. But then something changed. You didn't leave in anger. You didn't slam the emotional door. You just stopped spinning around someone who no longer recognized your gravity. That shift wasn't meant to punish her. It was meant to protect you. And though it was quiet, it was seismic. She's left wondering, where did all that attention go? Why does her phone stay silent? Why is your energy no longer in her orbit? She begins to feel the shift, not just emotionally, but energetically. Because when a man grounded in self-respect chooses to stop chasing validation, the balance of power changes. The center moves, and it moves back to him. You didn't make a scene. You didn't scream about how unfair it was. You'd simply realigned with yourself. That's what Stoicism teaches. Don't try to control others, only yourself. You stopped trying to be heard by someone who wasn't listening. You stopped proving your worth to someone who was too distracted to see it. And in that decision, you reclaimed your peace. Her ego may still whisper that you'll come back, that you always do. But something deeper in her heart now senses the truth. This time, you didn't leave to be chased. You left because staying would have been self-betrayal. She replays your last conversations, trying to decode the moment the shift occurred. Was it in your silence, your steady eyes, your calm demeanor when she tested your patience? Whatever it was, it haunts her now. Because you said something painful, but because you said nothing at all. And now, the absence of drama becomes the drama. The stillness you left behind becomes a mirror. She wanted the upper hand. But now she's left holding only her pride, while your quiet confidence echoes louder than any words she expected. You didn't demand recognition, you simply walked in truth. And that truth, felt too late, is what shakes her the most. At first, it was easy for her to overlook the little things. Your thoughtful check-ins, the calm presence you brought into chaotic moments, the way you listened not to reply, but to understand. She didn't notice these things because they came without demand. You didn't point to them or ask for praise. You simply gave them, day after day, because that's who you are. But now, those same little things are the loudest in the room. You didn't leave with fireworks or ultimatums. You didn't try to make her feel guilty for missing what she had. You simply stopped offering what was once given so freely. And in that silence, she's forced to confront everything she once dismissed as ordinary. The messages she skimmed. The support she took for granted. The rhythm of care she didn't even realize was holding her steady. This is what makes your absence powerful. It's not punishing. It's awakening. You didn't withdraw out of spite. You stepped back because your peace became more important than trying to convince someone of your value. That's what makes the loss so different. You were never dramatic. You were dependable. And now that dependability is gone, replaced with a void that noise can't fill. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That's exactly what you did. You didn't beg for attention. You didn't explain your worth. You simply embodied it. Gave. You showed up. And when it stopped being received, you left not loudly but clearly. Now she's left. With memories that replay in a new light, your patience now looks like strength. Your presence now feels like stability. The very things she once overlooked are now the things she misses most. Why? Because they weren't just gestures. They were reflections of your character, your discipline, your quiet devotion. And here's the twist. No one else is stepping in to fill that space. Not because they can't, but because they aren't you. You didn't perform love. You lived it. You didn't speak about commitment. You proved it. That's not something easily forgotten. She may never say it out loud, but now she sees the difference between attention and intention. You were intentional with your time, your energy, your heart. Now that intention is gone. It's the weight she carries. Now not just regret, but respect. The quiet kind. The kind that grows louder every day. You remain at peace without her. She once held your attention effortlessly. Your focus, your consistency, it all revolved around her as if she were the center of your emotional universe. You made her feel seen, supported, prioritized. Perhaps because you did so without complaint, she assumed your energy was infinite. But even the most grounded man has a limit. One day the orbit stops. Not with fireworks, not with fury, but with silence. That's when the shift begins. Here. You didn't storm out or slam the door. You didn't write a final message filled with anger or blame. You simply stopped orbiting around someone who no longer valued your gravity. And that quiet act wasn't dramatic, but it was revolutionary, because the moment a man stops pouring himself into someone who stopped appreciating it, the dynamic changes forever. Now she feels it not just the lack of messages or attention, but the absence of emotional presence. You're no longer checking in, no longer reading between the lines of her words. You're not steadying her when she spirals or responding to her silent cries for validation. That calm, masculine energy she once took for granted, it's gone. It's not out of malice, but out of maturity. You realize that staying where you're not valued erodes your self-worth. So you left, not to disappear, but to realign. To return to your own center. That's Stoicism in action, not cold detachment, but emotional discipline. You stopped trying to control how she sees you and started focusing on how long you let yourself go unseen. Now, without forcing anything, your absence begins to speak. It doesn't shout, but it resonates. In the quiet moments, she replays how grounded you were, how reliable you remained when things got tense. She sees the difference between a man chasing validation and one who has already found it within himself. You didn't walk away to prove a point. You walked away because you were done making excuses for someone else's blindness.
No.
Ironically, the more you release the need to be remembered, the more unforgettable you become. You are no longer chasing. You're no longer circling. You're standing still, whole, complete. And in that stance, something powerful happens. You reclaim the emotional space that was once misused. You didn't teach her a lesson. You just showed her what it means to walk in quiet strength. And now, without lifting a finger, your presence is stronger than ever because it lives not in words but in the contrast you left behind. Distance has a strange way of distorting memories. It softens the edges of conflict and sharpens the presence of character. And now, with you no longer in her life, she starts to romanticize the version of you that she once overlooked. The calmness that once annoyed her is now the peace she yearns for. The steadiness she called boring is now what she compares everyone else to, and they all fall short. She begins to remember your silence not as emptiness, but as depth. You didn't raise your voice in arguments. It's the way you listened, absorbed, reflected. You never tried to overpower her emotions. You met them with composure. And now, in your absence, that composure has become magnetic. It's not about perfection. It's about presence. And your presence, she realizes, wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. You anchored the room without trying. You offered security without controlling her. And most importantly, you never asked to be seen. You simply were. That's what separates a Stoic man from the rest. He doesn't beg for recognition, doesn't manipulate emotions. He shows up fully, and if that's not enough, he walks away fully too. Now, in the quiet moments, she replays your strength. It's not the strength that flexes or fights, but the strength that holds space, that stays centered, that doesn't abandon. Its values to win favor. And in doing so, she starts to see you differently, not as someone she lost, but as someone she never fully appreciated. You didn't make speeches about who you were. You embodied it. And now, she's haunted not by your words, but by your example. Not by the things you said, but by how you made her feel safe without smothering her, loved without needing to possess her. And that's the twist. The man she thought she understood turns out to be far more valuable in hindsight, not because you've changed, but because distance forced her to see clearly. Now she realizes that peace doesn't come from someone who tries to fix her. It comes from someone who remains unshaken in the face of chaos. You weren't perfect, but you were present. You weren't loud, but you were loyal. And now, no matter how many voices surround her, it's the quiet one she misses the most. That's the power of a man who walks away with dignity. He leaves a presence that lingers longer than any performance. And the memory of your grace becomes the standard. She didn't know she needed it until it was gone. There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't come from forgetting, but from choosing not to explain. You didn't leave with a long emotional letter or a last-minute voice note filled with pleas. You didn't ask her to see your side one more time. You just stopped talking. And that silence, that calm decision not to fight for closure, speaks louder than any goodbye ever could. Now she sits with all the unfinished sentences, the ones she thought you'd eventually complete, the questions she assumed would be answered in time. But the answers never came, and in their place is something far more unsettling. Reflection. What did he mean when he grew quiet? Why didn't he try to fix it? Was he letting go long before I realized? These aren't questions you planted, these are seeds born from absence. Because when a man walks away with composure, he leaves a space that the mind rushes to fill. And that mental silence becomes a mirror, not the kind that distorts, but the kind that reveals. You didn't leave to be chased. You left because staying would have meant constantly re-explaining your worth. And now, the silence you left behind doesn't scream, it lingers. It presses on her mind at night, shadows her thoughts during the day. It haunts, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Stoicism teaches us the power of restraint, of knowing when enough has been said, of understanding that silence, when chosen with dignity, can carry more weight than the loudest argument. And you embodied that. You walked away, not out of fear or anger, but out of peace. That your absence says everything you didn't need to say. Now, she's the one writing mental paragraphs, replaying scenes, drafting imaginary conversations where you say what she never gave you the space to say before. She fills the blanks, rewrites the timeline, reinterprets your silence and end. Doing so, she realizes something. Your stillness was not confusion, it was clarity. You weren't walking away lost. You were walking away whole. And that wholeness is what now echoes in the quiet corners of her heart. Not because you forced it, but because you left room for truth to grow. And here's the hardest part. For her realizing you left without trying to be understood. Because in the past, you always explained, always clarified, always tried to make things make sense. But not this time. This time, your silence was the statement. And she's finally starting to understand what it meant. You didn't need to slam the door to make your exit known. You didn't need to raise your voice to be heard. Your stillness was the final word, and that word is echoing in her heart long after you've gone. Because when a man walks away with self-respect, what he leaves behind is not noise, it's depth. Here's the paradox. You're gone, but somehow she feels you more than ever, not through loud reminders or desperate gestures, but in the stillness, the gaps where your presence used to live. In the quiet after a chaotic day when she once leaned on your calm. The tiny decisions she now makes, the loud decisions she used to make, knowing you were there to steady the moment. You didn't leave behind noise. You left behind a standard. And that's what she feels most. Not just the absence of conversation, but the absence of what you brought into her life. Consistency, intention, emotional safety. You weren't perfect. You didn't need to be. But you were present, and that presence carved out a space in her world that no one else seems able to fill. This is what happens when a man walks away with grace. His absence doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like revelation. And now, everything she once ignored stands in full clarity. You didn't demand her respect, you walked in it. You didn't seek validation, you embodied self-worth, and that kind of energy is unforgettable. She may have mistaken your calm for indifference. She may have confused your patience with passivity, but now in your absence the contrast is undeniable. Where there was depth, there's now only surface. Where there was certainty, there's now hesitation. And in that contrast, your presence only grows stronger. You didn't try to leave a mark, you simply lived with authenticity. You didn't play games to be remembered, you stood firm in your principles. And that's why you linger, not as a regret she can correct, but as a reminder she can't ignore. She starts to understand that strength isn't always visible, that love doesn't always shout, that the loudest impact often comes from the quietest exits. You didn't retreat to gain attention. You stepped back to preserve your peace. And now, every person she meets gets silently compared to the way you made her feel. Steady, seen. In the end, you didn't just leave her life. You changed the shape of what she thought connection was. It's the true power of a man who knows his worth. His silence isn't a void, it's a mirror. And she can't look away from the reflection it reveals. Now she realizes something she never expected, that real presence doesn't vanish when a man walks away with peace. It grows, it sharpens, it defines the silence. You didn't have to remind her of what she lost. The way you carried yourself, both when you stayed and when you left, speaks for you. And that's the kind of presence that lingers not as a shadow, but as a standard, one that only becomes clearer the longer you're gone. She expected you to leave in anger. She was ready for a dramatic exit, a clash of emotions, or even a desperate final message. But when you walked away with composure, without accusation or blame, you left behind something far more powerful: mirror. And now that mirror is what she faces each day. You didn't leave to hurt her. You didn't walk away to make her miss you. You stepped back because continuing to show up for someone who couldn't see you clearly was no longer love. It was self-neglect. You honored your worth by withdrawing, not with bitterness, but with balance. That act alone forced her to look inward, to reflect on what she had dismissed for too long. She now revisits every interaction, searching for what she overlooked. The care in your voice, the patience in your tone, the steadiness in your support. These weren't dramatic acts of love. They were subtle, real, grounded. And in the stillness you left behind, she begins to feel their weight. The consistency she once found predictable now feels irreplaceable. You didn't try to manipulate her with silence. You offered space. Space not to miss you, but to reflect. Space for her to face the absence of something genuine. And the more time passes, the more she realizes that what you offered wasn't just attention, it was alignment. Presence built on principles, not performance. This is what happens when a Stoic man leaves with dignity. He doesn't exit to be remembered, he exits to remain true to himself. And yet in doing so, he becomes unforgettable. Because while others fight to be heard, you allowed your absence to speak, and it spoke volumes. Now she begins to question her own patterns. Why did she push away the one person who never pushed back? Why did she test the boundaries of a man who simply set them without force? The answers don't come nicely, but the questions echo again and again. You didn't leave a wound, you left a window. One that forces her to look at the way she values presence, consistency, and truth. And that's the mirror you gave her, one she can't escape, no matter how far she looks away. And perhaps the most painful part is this: the realization that you were never trying to be everything, just consistent, present, real. She thought that kind of presence would always be there. Now she sees the difference between someone who performs affection and someone who simply lives it. You never needed to say, "Look at me." Your actions did. Your silence now echoes louder than any speech. And every time she glances into that mirror you left behind, she's not just seeing what she lost, she's seeing what she wasn't ready to hold. You didn't leave with fireworks, you didn't shout, plead, or cry. You simply walked away, quietly, completely, with your peace intact. And yet, now more than ever, she hears your voice not in sound, but in memory. Not in volume, but in presence, because your absence didn't remove you, it magnified you. At first, she thought it was just space, that she needed time, that your silence would eventually fade. But it hasn't. If anything, it's grown. It's taken up residence in places she never expected. Her thoughts when she wakes up, the choices she now makes alone, the calm she can't find elsewhere. You see, you didn't leave a wound, you left a presence. A steady, unwavering presence that doesn't need noise to be felt. That's the essence of a Stoic man. He doesn't chase affection or demand attention, he earns memory through consistency and character. She begins to feel it in conversations. In moments when someone else speaks and she's comparing their tone to yours. In flashes of stress, when she remembers how grounded you used to be. No one told her it would feel this way, that silence could echo louder than words. You weren't trying to haunt her, you were just being real. And now, in your absence, she starts to grasp the full measure of what you've brought to her life. Your patience, your clarity, your willingness to stand still when everything else was spinning. Those things didn't vanish when you left. They remained as reminders of what a man can be when he chooses inner peace over external validation. Every moment of stillness becomes a conversation with the you that no longer stands beside her. She remembers your quiet strength, your thoughtful pauses, your refusal to react with drama. And the more she reflects, the more she realizes it wasn't your words that had the biggest impact. It was your restraint. You didn't try to leave a legacy. You simply lived with intention. And that's the legacy she can't forget. We're not a performance, you were a presence. One that still speaks even when you no longer do. That's the part she never saw coming. You didn't try to prove your worth, you just embodied it. You didn't try to make her stay, you gave her the freedom to go. And in doing so, you revealed something she couldn't see before. The difference between someone who needs to be noticed and someone who is simply undeniable. Now, your peace lives on inside her uncertainty. Your calm stands in contrast too. The noise around her, without ever intending to, you've become the standard she didn't know she needed. There's a kind of strength that doesn't roar, doesn't demand the last word or insist on being right, simply walks away when it knows its value is no longer recognized. That's the strength you chose, the quiet strength of restraint. When she expected anger, you gave her composure. When she anticipated chaos, you offered clarity. You didn't beg for understanding. You didn't draft a final plea. You honored yourself with silence. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you knew saying it would cost you your peace. And that choice, that steady, stoic withdrawal, planted a seed in her heart that's now beginning to grow. She thought the absence of a fight meant the absence of feeling. But that couldn't be further from the truth. You felt everything. You just didn't weaponize it. You carried the pain with grace. You didn't try to force healing. You created space for it. Not just for you, but for her too. And now, as she stands alone with the silence you left behind, she's realizing something important. Your calm wasn't detachment. It was discipline. You weren't withholding emotion. You were exercising emotional control. You didn't need to be loud to be heard. You didn't need to win her back to know your worth. That's what Stoicism teaches. The true strength lies in how you carry yourself when no one's watching. That you don't prove your value by chasing, arguing, or performing. You prove it by walking in alignment with your principles even when it hurts. She's not haunted by your absence. Because it was dramatic, but because it was decisive. Your silence wasn't passive. It was purposeful. And every moment she spends replaying the past, she's not just questioning you, she's questioning herself. You didn't leave with a lesson, but you left with truth. And that truth, the strength to let go without anger, now lingers louder than any apology she thought she deserved. That's the quiet strength that shifts everything. Not just for her, but for you. Because you didn't just walk away from her, you walked toward yourself. And now, every echo of your absence tells a deeper story. She begins to see that the man who walks away quietly is not weak, he is rare. Most people yell to be noticed. You whispered by walking in truth. And that whisper now lives in every moment. She wonders, what if I had seen him more clearly? You didn't vanish. You simply stepped out of the role she'd kept casting you in. And now, in your stillness, she sees the man she never fully understood until he was gone. You weren't flashy. You didn't chase drama. You simply showed up, day after day, without fanfare, without expecting applause. And in a world full of chaos and half-effort, your consistency stood out. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, reliable. Grounded at first, she may not have noticed. Consistency can be so quiet that we often take it for granted. But when you stop showing up, when your presence disappeared like a steady rhythm fading into silence, that's when she felt it. She started to understand something she hadn't before. True consistency isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up when no one asks, giving when no one demands, and offering support when it's least expected. Your reliability wasn't just a habitat, was a reflection of your character. And now, without it, she feels the void. What's worse, no one else can fill it. Because consistency isn't something you can imitate. People can fake attention, they can pretend to care. But real consistency, the kind you offered without hesitation, that's rare. And now she's left trying to find it, but it's gone. When you walked away, it wasn't because you didn't care. It was because your energy wasn't being valued. You weren't being appreciated for what you gave, and so you stopped giving. Not out of anger, but out of respect for yourself and for your time. And now she feels the weight of what she took for granted. The moments she thought would always be there, the small check-ins, the constant support, the simple presence that steadied her world are all gone. Not because you decided to punish her, but because you realized your worth and chose to walk away with dignity. She may tell herself that she doesn't need your presence, that she doesn't miss the little things. But deep down, she knows. She feels it in the quiet moments, when she remembers how you always made her feel safe without, how you were there not with grand gestures, but with steady love and loyalty. Your absence has become louder than any argument could have been. Your consistency, once invisible, is now the thing she cannot stop thinking about. And it hits hardest, because she knows she didn't truly value it until it was gone. And that's the essence of what you left behind, an echo. Quiet, powerful reminder of what real consistency looks like. And while she may not say it out loud, she will always carry that echo with her. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away not in anger, not in bitterness, but in peace. That's what you did. You didn't raise your voice or slam the door. You simply left with grace. And in doing so, you left something behind. The lesson, she may not have seen it at first. She may have even believed you'd come back, that your silence was temporary. But time has a way of revealing the truth, and now your absence is teaching her more than your presence ever. She begins to notice the things you used to carry the emotional weight, the steady presence, the way you held the space, even when things were hard. She remembers your patience when she was uncertain, your strength when things got heavy, and your calm in the middle of her storms. All of that is gone now, and the void it left behind is undeniable. You didn't leave to make her feel this. You left because you had to honor yourself. You realized that staying in a place where your worth wasn't recognized was no longer an option. And now, in your absence, she sees what she failed to protect. That's the paradox of strength. It's quiet. It doesn't demand recognition, but when it's gone, its absence is deafening. She doesn't just miss you, she misses who she became when she was with you, someone grounded, supported, secure. Now she's left facing a different kind of silence, one that doesn't hold promises, only reflection. And in that reflection, she begins to understand. You weren't trying to teach her a lesson, but she learned one anyway. She's come to see that not all losses come from conflict. Some come from clarity. It's the kind of clarity that makes a man step away, not because he's weak, but because he's finally strong enough to choose peace over proving a point. Your silence wasn't punishment. It was closure. And while she may never say it out loud, deep down she knows. Losing you wasn't about the moment you left. It was about the moments she never saw clearly enough when you were still there. Now the silence you left behind speaks volumes. It reminds her of what she had, of who you were, and of how effortlessly you gave what she didn't know she needed. It echoes in the quiet spaces of her day, the mornings without your grounding presence, the nights without your calming words. Each time she feels the emptiness, she's reminded that your strength wasn't just in being there, it was in knowing when to walk away. And though it hurts her now, part of her respects you more for it, because in a world full of people who stay for the wrong reasons, you had the courage to leave for the right one. There's a moment when it finally hits her, not during the arguments. It's not when you walked away, but in the stillness afterward. That's when she starts to see what she lost. Not just a man, but a presence, a stability, a quiet confidence that never asked for attention but always gave reassurance. She remembers how you carried the conversations, how you steadied her chaos without needing to fix it. You didn't try to change her, you simply accepted her. And in a world full of people who try to impress, your authenticity stood out. But she didn't see it then. At first, she thought your calm meant indifference. She mistook your restraint for detachment. She believed that your silence meant you didn't care. But now she understands it was strength. It was control. Was dignity. And that's what haunts her. Because while she chased attention, you practiced presence. While she spoke to be heard, you listened to understand. And now that you're gone, the contrast is sharp. The noise of others only makes her miss your silence more. She sees how rare you were, how consistent, how deeply grounded you were in your values. And slowly it begins to dawn on her. Losing you wasn't just losing someone who loved her. It was losing someone who showed her what real love looked like even when it was quiet. Now, in your absence, she replays everything, the way you looked. At her not with possession, but with presence. The way you stayed not out of need, but out of choice. The way you left not in rage, but in reverence for your own peace. She's surrounded by noise now, but none of it feels like you. Because you weren't just a person in her life. You were a mirror, one that reflected who she could have been, if only she had seen you more clearly. And in that reflection, she sees the truth. You didn't walk away to teach her a lesson, but life did. And now, with no more chances left to rewrite the story, she understands what she had. Too late. And maybe now she talks about you differently, not as the one who left, but as the one she let slip away. In conversations, she may not say your name, but the silence between her words speaks volumes. That kind of regret doesn't fade. It lingers in the quiet, in the could-have-beens. She doesn't need anyone to tell her what she lost. She knows. Every time she reaches for something stable and finds only air, she knows. Every time she remembers how effortlessly you made her feel safe, she feels it. And that is the truth she now lives with. You were the anchor in her storm, the calm she didn't understand until the winds took you away.